Welcome to the live stream, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host today, Bumpy McSquigums, joined by Cupogoodness and a tiny disaster. We are doing our game industry discussion today. It's all about networking, the do's and the don'ts. Hello.
Hey, Bumpy, how's it going?
It's going okay. My transition was a little slow, but it's okay. We're here.
I am retweeting and liking. There we go.
I'm tweeting.
Yeah.
A push of a button.
How's the week been so far, TD?
Hard to say. It's a blur as always.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like it's suddenly Wednesday, or it's kind of upon us. But yeah, Bumpy, how have things been going for you? I saw you were been doing some YouTube stuff and coming off the roguelike sale,
Yep.
I believe last week.
Yeah, so many things to do on YouTube, but it's okay. I will continue to drown in my giant pool of work. It'll be okay.
Alrighty. Well, today we decided we wanted to kind of go over some of the sort of thoughts and best practices for networking, and to just define that is communicating with your peers in your business, industry, etc. That it may or may work out to business related things down the road. If it doesn't, that's okay. We'll talk about that a little bit. So, Tiny Disaster, you slapped this topic onto our our doctrine, thoughts as you put it.
Topics. That's going to be what we say every week.
Just smack them like to the wall.
It feels like such an important part of growth within the industry for any individual who is here, whether you're working for a company or trying to break in or a solo developer, that you will do better by not necessarily working as part of the team, but being part of the broader community of game developers and putting yourself out there and just making yourself known. And it can be such an intimidating topic for a lot of people who don't really see themselves as extroverted or like talking about their accomplishments or any of that stuff. So it's a simple topic, but not necessarily one that a lot of people enjoy.
Hi, Missy. How's it going? She joins in the feeling that today does not feel like a Wednesday. It feels like a Monday. Yeah, networking to me is I lost my train of thought there. Bumpy, you take it for a second if you have anything to add with that. What I was going to say was networking to me is like one of the first ego checks that you can get in entering into a career path or an industry or whatever. It's supposed to be something where you acknowledge that despite everything that all the belief in yourself and everything that and all the all the areas that you feel you can cover and the jobs you can get and all that kind of stuff, you sort of have to make an admittance that you're not going to be able to do this by yourself if you want to get to where ultimately you want to get to. A lot of times that's just a steady job in the industry or whatever it may be. And so I think networking is great because it actually makes you stop for a second and say, I need to really build connections. I really need to establish, a network of people that I can trust and work with and reach out to if I have questions, if I need feedback, if I have connections to some of these people, they may be able to provide me opportunities. But that gets into different areas of how to treat your people you network with and meet with and such. But yeah, to me, it's just really about saying I'm not an island. I'm going to reach out to other people and find a way to improve myself through these conversations and, potentially have these connections down the road as we all kind of proceed through our career and see where things go. And we might end up working together at some point, which is really a cool thing.
Fair. Now, networking doesn't necessarily have to be directly related to peers either. It could be, technically I'm here because of networking. I reached out through, even the relationship I have through developers, other PR folks and stuff that I do through my content creation. That's all still networking in some sense. So there's a lot more to it than you probably think just off the top of your head. You're like, oh, I just want to contact another YouTuber, for instance, or What
Yeah,
does
peers is probably the
XPR
wrong
mean?
word, but just anybody that kind of can that you think could possibly. Again, it's not about like you seeking people who are going to be able to solely help you all the time. You understand it's a two-way road, but you're looking for people that you're like, this is beneficial for me to know this person, both just as like a personal thing, they're a cool person, but also they're someone that can help me in my on my career path in some way, and they're willing to. That's a really important part of that as well. We'll get into that too. So it's definitely something where I feel yeah, peers was too specific. It's just generally people that like, because you'll meet people that when you network you might find a mentor, something like that. So it's or something along those lines. So there's lots of different individuals you can meet in the networking space. But yeah, let's talk about kind of the approaches of doing that. I put my notes down originally, and then this morning I was like, but they're kind of antiquated. They're based off of like being like available and being able to travel, being able to go to places and stuff. A lot of my notes do have like sort of this slant towards public, being in public places and being in spaces where there are like-minded people or people in the same industry, if not the same job, or like area of the industry as you. So that said, I'll go over some of those as we go, but we'll get into the online aspects as well. But beyond that, if you're going to say, okay, in 2022, as whether or not it's still a pandemic or not, like my country's moving on from it and doesn't care. Like it just their behavior is that these public events are happening essentially, like these meetings are happening. So it's like it's your call if you want to go to them or not at this point. That and some places require masks, some places don't. A lot of places don't nowadays, or at least in my area. So it's a really interesting time. And I just want to put it out there that it's something that it's a risk you have to assess if you're going to go out to the public and do those kind of things. But I would start like locally and regionally and seeing if there's anything there. There may or there may not be at all, depending on your location. If you're close to like a major metropolis, or a metropolitan area, like I'm 3 hours from Seattle and 3 hours from Portland, so I could occasionally go up to like Seattle, even Vancouver, Canada, or over to Portland. But it's not like something I could just like go to like every weekly meeting or something like that. But it's possible I could look at those areas regionally and say, what could I go to? What would I network? And I have in the past. That's something that I've done, right? When I was down in LA, that was very helpful because it was just all right there. But where I'm at right now, I could feel, if I was maybe 5 hours to the east of where I'm at right now, there would really be nothing anywhere, probably. You're lucky to find a Craigslist post about some other lonely fellow being like, I also like doing this kind of stuff. So, and I am a blur. Let's get this fixed.
He's the blue blur. He's Sonic.
Oh, man, nice. It is blue today. Nice blue shirt with the cassette tape on it. So that's really good stuff. Anyway, yeah. So I would start like in that order. If you're strapped and not going to be able to make it to some of the more major events, which great opportunities can be had at the major events. Obviously, that's something that if you can get to, that's great. But I understand that's kind of a privilege take to be like, yeah, go to PAX, go to GDC, go to all these places and network there, because that's where a lot of successful people are located, and that's where you want to be to mixing it up with. It's a really interesting point that I kind of like tripping myself into is, kind of who are the people that you should be networking with, and how do you kind of feel that out? Do you two have any thoughts on this before I jump in?
As far as who to network toward?
Yeah, like okay, so like in a general sense, like in like just thinking about like a scenario where you get into a conversation with someone, are there kind of, let's say, white flags and or red flags that come up that you say, this person is someone that I would like to continue to this networking process with, or oh nope, this isn't really someone that's going to help me. I need to not necessarily disengage them entirely, but to think that I'm going to work with them down the road, have some sort of like networking connection with them, look for them for advice and stuff. That's what I'm thinking about, because that's a lot of times that we've talked about in the past, which I think we talked about last week. There's a lot of judgment call kind of stuff you have to make, right? Like you got to feel it out in the moment. And a lot of times you'll come home with a bunch of business cards and you'll go through them and you're like 9 out of 10 of these don't really matter. Like as far as like something to build forward with. And that can be also about like event selection. And to give you guys an example, one time I went to like a mobile games like developer event, so a mobile game development event, and we had like 1 or 2 titles in mobile, but everything else on PC. So I loosely connected with mobile, but not really that deep. After networking and getting out there and like looking at who I talked to, it was really just a bunch of like ad publishers and other like mobile like free to play like kind of entities, businesses, and things like that. And I was like, none of these people really like actually matter to me in the networking sense. None of them are going to. I'm not going to really connect with any of them. And this sort of flies in the face of a point I'm going to make. I wanted to bring up, which is to say that you shouldn't throw anybody out the door and say, oh, they're never going to help me and stuff. Like, of course, always be polite and don't just assess people like by like their worth based on like the business aspect and stuff like that. But that's kind of part of networking, right? Is to be able to say, okay, like this person who is hitting me up all the time with their services that have nothing to do with me, that I don't really want my games to use. We need to disconnect, at least on a business, on like the business level. We need to be able to like separate that kind of thing. So anyway, I've been running on a little bit. What do you two think?
You have any thoughts, Tiny Disaster?
But so far from his original question to.
I'm back, baby. You can tell I'm feeling better when that
essentially red flags or white flags when talking to other people. What do you look for when you're trying to find people to network with? I think
I maybe in the instances where I've been in networking situations come at it from a different angle because I haven't had anything where I need specific connections. Like I'm looking for anything specific in terms of networking connections. So I'm looking for more community building connections.
Right. And the more desperate you are to network, the worse it's going to be in most cases, right? Like you want to be a casual approach is generally going to be the best approach. A understanding of long-term developments of relationships and not forcing anything in like the short term is also really important as you network. Maybe you meet someone that is just kind of similar to you and is on the same path, but you're like, well, they're not a business partner, or I'm not going to necessarily work with them because they're doing their games and I'm doing my games. But you still have an opportunity to connect with them, stay close with them, support them, like social media style likes, and vice versa, and they can return the favor, those kind of things. And down the line, they may end up in a position, whether they stay a developer or they move on to some other position in the industry, where they could really help you. And that happens pretty regularly as I'm entering my the latter half of my second decade in the industry. So those things come about kind of organically as you say, I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to talk to some people. I'm going to go to some events that I feel are worth going to, which I think is really, really important in networking, right? Like if you're going to do the event styles of going to an event to social network, as I mentioned before, the mobile game development event was not something that was really helpful to me. So I needed to understand next time that I learned from that, like a lesson. Okay, I'm going to go to networking events that actually apply, pretty much, to what I do, like as much as possible, whether it's meeting business partners or other developers like peers, or going to like TwitchCon and meeting streamers, etc. So just those kind of approaches. And it's like for me, if someone jams a business card in my face right away, that's not something I don't really enjoy. And I'd like to point out that I'm probably guilty of doing that. And I'm probably 100% am guilty of doing that probably like 10 years, 15 years ago when I was initially, trying to get my name out of it. Again, desperation is a stinky cologne. So you have to understand that like when you go about your business, when you start a conversation with somebody that you want to connect with, don't just lead with that kind of stuff. Like, just, again, a casual approach, as TD mentioned, is going to be the best approach. And if they ask, hey, what do you do? Or you can, again, if it's a networking event and people are kind of just expecting that to come out, you can absolutely mention A, B, and C in terms of what you do and how you work and all that kind of stuff. But don't, belabor it. Don't like keep repeating it. Don't go over it. Or like if they feel like they're not really, if you could feel, I guess, from the conversation that they're not really interested in talking about that. Again, it depends on the event. You might be like, hey, we're at an event where we're supposed to network. But again, you're not supposed to force anything. So it's really important that you have that kind of approach with everyone, that you kind of get the feel, whether it's a one-on-one conversation or a lot of times you'll step into like a group of people or a circle that's the conversation already going. Kind of get the feel of that conversation before you hop in and such. But yeah, it's important to identify who you are, what you're doing there, all that kind of stuff. But then after that, it's just kind of like how the conversation goes, whether or not there's going to be more conversation right then and there about the business opportunities, the connections that you guys have in the industry, etc., or if that's something that you discuss maybe later down the line, or if ever, that kind of thing. TD?
To an earlier point you made about being polite to everybody, I just want to throw in that is not necessarily always the case. If there are people who are making you uncomfortable or like you do not need to, I've been to like publishing events where I've been told to smile while I'm working behind a booth or whatever. Back then I was not brave enough to not be polite to people. Now I wish I had been. But in a similar vein of just like, as you're talking to people and trying to figure out who can help you, you need to give it more than just like a surface value as you're talking to people and trying to get a sense of what they do. Especially in the games industry, it's everywhere. There's a huge level of people assuming that women and people of color are not anyone worth talking to. Like, so many speakers have gotten turned away by security guards at GDC because they just assume that this woman is not going to be speaking there, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So don't just look at someone's badge and try to judge in half a second whether or not this is worth something to you. That's just not a great way to go into things, and a lot of times your instincts will be wrong.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's a good point that being polite to everyone is with the caveat that unless they mess with you, and then all bets are off. And then you can totally do you go for it and turn or hopefully you find support if you can, because I understand that a lot of times it's like go for it, be mean, or like be rude and all that kind of stuff. It's like that's just not going to naturally happen for a lot of people.
Professional is probably the way to phrase it.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
you're still in a work environment. People are going to be judging however you interact.
You're certainly. I'm certainly okay with someone reciprocating the same professionalism or lack thereof that they are getting. So if they're not getting a lot of professionalism, then they certainly don't deserve a lot of professionalism back. That said, I think my point about the politeness was if they're a standard good lady, bloke, NB, etc., like good person, and you had a good conversation with them, don't just blow them off. Like, and if they have nothing to offer to you other than just that nice conversation, that should be all right. That's okay. Don't blow them off. Be polite. Know that down the line, like, you may see them again, and you being a jerk is going to like not weigh well down the road if that was the case. So, and I can again probably count on one hand the people that I have in my never, I'm not going to work with this person ever. I'm not going to ever communicate with this person ever. And I know that when they treated me like they treated me, they didn't think I was going to be in my position that I'm in now. So it's a thing that you have to keep in mind. I'm not saying be polite to people who are jerks, but don't be the jerk, so to speak. That's a really important thing because again, you and your networking, you can get into that mindset of value assessing humans too much, and you need to not do that.
Any other thoughts, Tiny Disaster?
If you've got anything to add, I think we've kind of.
Okay, so I don't know. Networking's kind of a weird one for me because I feel the few mentors that I've had over the course of just things that I've done tend to always see you as like I'll help you, but type situation. And that's not a real great feeling to have, but
yeah,
you got to start somewhere. So don't necessarily expect to be like, hey, I'm doing this thing, I'm new, and somebody's willing to help you. Don't expect them to be like, years down the line, hey, come on over, let's, hang out. Because you're still that person who approached them green as grass, and it sucks, but that is a reality. So that's just one of those things to maybe mentally prepare for, and
That's
something
100% like
I wasn't aware of.
amazing point. That's an amazing point. When you go into networking events and you think you just kind of have to be able to frame your expectations, because you go in there thinking that you're just going to find some people that are like, come hang out with us immediately and get in this group. And yeah, we've got people that'll support you, all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's possible. And if you find that, amazing, right? Like that's a really great situation to start off. And if it's not facetious, right? They're not BSing you, and they are like, really awesome people. But that a lot of times is not what happens. It's very cliquey. It's very, oh, these people already know each other, and I don't know any of them. And that can be like really challenging at first to like say, I'm going to walk in this place, whether it's online or, in public. I'm going to, sort of find my way in the way I'm supposed to, and not just like, barge in like a rhino, but, take my time and make sure that I'm going about this the right way and actually start building connections. I think a lot of these spaces that I'm talking about are like reminiscent of spaces that I've been in like a decade ago, which were much more boys club-ish than you see a lot of spaces now, which is a good thing, right? Like it's a good thing that it's evolved now, where I think there's a lot less of this like kind of, you know, shadowy cabal, or we're going to put this like you can't come in sign, like limited capacity, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot more inclusion. I think about our little contribution here. I think about a lot of the indie references and guides that we mentioned, websites we mentioned a few weeks ago. That's not just being shared in like in a small pocket now anymore, and that's really good. And there's still groups and circles and all that kind of stuff, which is fine. But I feel like there was at one point like such a lion's share of the information was shared by such a small percentage total of of people in the industry, and so that I'm glad that over the last 10 years that's basically made I wouldn't say necessarily a complete wholesale change, but really good evolution in the right direction on that front. Because I think networking, while it's still important, it's not maybe the have to do thing that you may have had to do when you were in 15 years ago, even like social media building. We can talk about this a little bit, TD. Social media building is perhaps like if you're good at that, you might not. That is networking in a sense, and that might be the thing that just leads you that way. You're on mute right now, but talk a little bit about that.
I'm not on mute.
Oh, now you aren't. When you talk there, for some reason I saw your mouth moving, and I didn't hear anything. It might have just been us talking at the same time.
I feel like I had a point on Bumpy's point, though, before we jump over to social networks. Just going into any actual event space, not necessarily with realistic expectations, almost with no expectations, because even, okay, say you are invited into a group and you have a great chat, that doesn't necessarily mean if someone's company is hiring later and you say, oh, hey, I met you at that's going to be your ticket up the ladder. And
right.
You need to look at it all kind of organically, that these are people. They have a whole bunch of other priorities and they're complicated, and maybe the interaction didn't go as well in their heads as in your head, or they had a lot going on and maybe don't remember you, or they just don't have somewhere that's a good fit for you, or just anything to offer right now. So going into it just kind of with an open mind to see what happens, I think is probably the healthiest way to look at it. Networking is still a valuable tool. It's also a bit of a crapshoot that there's no guaranteed results.
Well, I think what's really important is to network the way that makes the most sense to you. Like the way that Bumpy networks is different than how I networked, and it's probably different than how Tiny Disaster has networked. And we probably have Venn diagrams, right? We probably have like little areas that we have very similar approaches to, but it's usually, if you're networking in one way, that's probably incorrect, right? Like there's multiple ways that you could be networking. By putting yourself out there on your website, your YouTube channel, etc. That is sort of a first step towards networking. Building social channels, making connections through there. It's possible that you find a group because of, you know, the engine you're building a game on. We talked about this recently, like, you know, in those spaces, like something that you're working on. Maybe it's like an RPG group or a roguelike group, a roguelike development group, and you just find your stride with those people as you share your work with them. You don't need to, like, you know, go to spaces that, if you feel like you're already building like really those nice relationships within the space and and the areas that you're working in, you don't necessarily have to go like super outside of yourself, or like, you know, make like huge efforts to go to like major events to connect with people, etc. Again, it's 2022. That's not called for or like necessary in any way. It's something that a lot of people still do, and can benefit people if they have the privilege and the ability to get there and all that kind of stuff. But again, I think the importance of what's going on right now is that a lot of people that normally couldn't get to these events and normally basically have been swept aside, so to speak, because they just didn't have these platforms, are now getting these platforms digitally, internationally, and we're getting a lot more varied work in the indie space. We're getting to see like if you thought indie variety was high before, it's just getting more and more. Like the variety is, like, in terms of the depth and the breadth of different games you can play, because these developers are now getting opportunities not just to make their games, but to get them showcased, to get them highlighted, to get them featured, and to get that exposure that, you know, we all talk about is really, really important to get and stuff. So all of that is to say, like, feel out what you want to do. Like, obviously, it's your call in terms of like how you approach things. Like, if I look back at what I did, it was pretty anxiety at, like, you know, like, there's a lot of anxiety with it at times. And if you're like, hey, I'm into mental health and I'm not signing up for a bunch of that, like, that's probably fine. Like, that's okay. That's an okay approach. I think that there are a couple leaps of faith that you could take with networking, even if it's a little bit like you having to deal with your anxiety based on, you know, who you are and what you're able to get through and stuff. That may help you if you are willing to take certain steps that are a little outside your comfort zone in networking. You can go, you can achieve some really cool relationships that you maybe didn't think you could have ever. Be connected with people that like support you in a way that you didn't know you could be connected with. So things to keep in mind there. Go ahead, TD.
So networking is also a skill. Some people can be naturally charismatic and great at it, but for a lot of us, it's something you get better at the more you do it. So even if you feel like, oh, I'm terrible at this now, the only way to get better at it is to put yourself out there, so you don't feel quite as uncomfortable with each progressive event, and you connect a little bit more yourself. And it does get easier over time, and it sucks for a lot of people at the beginning. So you are not alone in that.
Yeah, I feel like that's really important, is if, just like anything, it takes practice, right? You said, and I think if you feel like you have a bad or just like a meh encounter, you have to kind of try to just sort of say, okay, if I'll do a quick assessment, or maybe I'll assess it later in terms of anything I would have done different next time around. But other than that, I'm not going to, you know, be hard on myself about it, or like, you know, get frustrated or angry with myself, just based on every little interaction that you have in networking, because it's kind of the, not the more the merrier, but you're going to have more and more opportunities to network, right? So some opportunity or some networking conversation just doesn't go the right way, or it just flounders. It's okay. Like, just move on. Again, if you feel like you did something wrong, assess that and try to fix your mistakes, but keep moving forward and go forward from there.
And if you see it in the moment, you can apologize. Like, that is
100%.
So far.
Yeah.
If you're like, yep, I phrased that wrong, or I was just stressed.
It's
People
amazing.
Will not curse you forever for
no. It's amazing how many how much in social conversations, virtually or in public, especially in public, that we get caught up, right? And we get in this sense that we can't slow ourselves down, that we can't just say, hey, what I said right there, like you said, just didn't come out right, or I didn't say that right, I apologize, or you brought something to light that I didn't think about, like things like that. That goes a long way, like you said, to a person who is like, hey, this person, you've shown that you're like a real person that's able to sort of like, that you don't just have this mask up the whole time, right? There's this networking mask up that's like the whole time, and it's like, hey, I'm only really talking to you because, again, I'm value assessing. Like, that's the mask that you see up a lot of times in networking circles, that can feel a little like, again, feel that out. And if you feel like that's one of the networking circles you're in is very slimy like that, then maybe you look for another one, right? Like, because that's not really going to be beneficial anyway. Again, a lot of these people, the best people I've ever networked with are basically selfless people. Like they've received help from me at times, but they're never looking for it. Not like aggressively. You know what I mean? Like never so much just by like never looking for handouts, never reaching out like that. But if we have an opportunity to work together and they're like, yeah, of course, sure. And then it goes great and it's wonderful. And they're always like throwing things out at my way in terms of, hey, here's an opportunity if you're interested. It's just such a cool thing. So I think having that kind of approach, right? A co-op approach, right? In video games, like Left 4 Dead style, I'm not going to worry about my back. I'll worry about the other people's backs, and they're going to worry about my back, and we'll never get touched. If everybody takes care of it and approaches it that way, those are the people you want to network with, people that got your back, and you got theirs. Like that should be reciprocated.
So one of the other things, you were talking about red flags, and I think you said white flags, but I think it would be green flags. Where white flags could be cautionary.
Yeah, green flags. No, I like that. Green flags better.
When I tend to look at people that have the same interest as me, not necessarily the same viewpoint, but are open to at least talk about it or debate it. Not a I know everything and nothing can ever be said otherwise. And that's one of the red flags, is somebody who's just like, you talk to them, they're like, I know everything about everything all of the time, always, and nothing else matters, and you are irrelevant type situation. And I've met people like that, and it's not anything to do.
It's like I saw a meme that was like, still undefeated, Uncle Tom's long-standing beliefs. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, yeah, we get it. Like, you're not willing to change your stance on anything, and thus it's kind of pointless to talk to you. Like, it's you know what I mean? Like, it's not worth having that kind of conversation. You said something else that sparked me, but I can. You said.
Similar interests, even
right.
if it's a different viewpoint, and that's important.
And I think that's really important too, because similar interests, same viewpoint, echo chamber is going to occur eventually. You're going to reinforce things, whether they're right or not, and whether they're true or not within the greater scale of like social society and stuff. Like you'll be reinforcing things that like you should occasionally at least be challenging yourself on, right? Bumpy's pointing out similar interests but different viewpoints gives you the opportunity to say, well, blah, blah, blah. And someone says, well, I disagree. And you can have a respectful, discussion about that or debate about that. That actually happens routinely on our streams with us on the PGS. And it's a really nice thing because we all kind of have that trust that it's okay to have your energy and excitement and your belief and your passion, as long as it never gets personal. And it really just hasn't. And it's just like a really nice thing as people make up their points and someone's like, no, I don't think so. And everyone's like, okay, well, let's, it's just like, it's almost like a group of friends discussing things. And I think networking ultimately is like, you'll eventually feel that acquaintance, friendship, kind of that in between like an acquaintance or a friendship, depending on that scale, right? It'll slide because some people will be straight up acquaintances I have people that I've been acquaintances with, since I got into the industry, essentially. They'll never be more than that. And that's okay. That's totally cool. Like, they basically, again, if they have some sort of business opportunity that they want to bring to my attention, that's when we talk. That's cool. I don't need to have a personal friendship with everybody that I'm connected with in the networking sense or in the business sense. But there is a lot of people that are really close friends of mine that I've met through networking that are like, I would definitely put them I would maybe not best friends from high school or college, but lifelong friends now. That are it's nice to have those people when you do go to certain events or when you do have to announce something, like push a game out, and they're willing to make some noise for you, to congratulate you, to pat you on the back and support you. Those things can really lift you up. And of course, it's just the same as what we were talking about earlier about being on an island. It's not just about the business connections. When you release a game, it's amazing to have people just be like, great job, and support you, and to have peers that are excited for you to put something out there. I think we're seeing a lot more of that lately with a lot of in just different areas of the industry, whether it be indies, streamers, content creators, etc. A lot more understanding that there's sort of space for all of us as long as we have our own kind of individual, kind of purposes. So that's been a really cool thing to see. Versus we've seen a lot of, kind of again cliques and exclusive kind of behavior, exclusionary behavior, I should say, in the past.
I wanted to say though that it's fine to have people that have the same interests as you and agree with you. That's not a bad thing, but don't turn
No.
someone away who doesn't. And also, it's fine to even disagree. Not necessarily agree.
Yeah.
I have a different point of view. But even if
Yeah,
they
just
are able to disagree, that's totally fine. And there was one other thing. I can't remember what it was. I was going to say.
yeah, but don't have 12 people in the same room that have to agree with you is all. And
Yeah, you
that's
still
it.
have to go
That's all
run
I'm saying.
screaming from it. Yeah. So,
Yeah. Of course.
it always
Of course not.
feels that way because you do want that sounding board, somebody who can like, all right, I'm not just going to agree with you because you're these are my thoughts. Yeah.
It could be a never-ending quest if you're like, I'm only going to work with people that disagree with me all the time. It's like, I don't know, that seems like a never-ending quest to some degree. So because again, it's easier. I guess it's the red flag of, or not the red flag, but how do I describe it? It's easier to work with people who agree with you or to network with people who agree with you than people who don't. Like it's a natural, I think, inclination to do that because you just kind of maybe just connect right away. Oh, we have something to talk about, and we're happy about talking about this. You're not saying something that goes, whoa, I have a different opinion about this. Are you mature enough now when you have that different opinion to move forward with that person? You know what I mean? In the same way that you're moving forward with the person that you totally agree with. And I think is really important.
The other thing that I guess I struggle with, because there's a lot of people who do networking, whereas I personally try to build relationships. I feel that's the right way to do it, but that's not how everybody does it. And that's kind of that slight disconnect where I'm like, okay, cool, you helped me a bunch. I want to do some stuff with you and help you, and we can grow together. And they're like, go away, kid, you're bothering me type situation.
Well, and that to me is your definition is networking, whereas their definition is that short-term false sense behind the word, right? Like it's like that's false. That's falsy, like networking. It's manipulative. It is a lot of times, like I know even it's not it like bosses. I know that like I have a friend who's in AAA that have bosses that tell him things like, so this is like a weird networking thing where bosses will tell them, I just need, we're almost there. I'll get you that promotion, kind of thing. And then the promotion never comes. This is a really nasty tactic by like managers at not just in games, but in different, levels and stuff like that to sort of like manipulate the people that work under them to get the most out of them, make them look good, and then just like nothing else after that and stuff. So this is a form of this is a form of like false networking to them, or this is a form of like manipulative networking, because like my friend, is sort of anticipating and eventually counting on those until he's of course lied to multiple times and you can kind of call out that it's not going to happen, right? Like, but the first couple of times you take them at their word, right? You say, I believe you. You're gonna be able to help me and you'll be here for me. And then, the weather changes or something, just something random happens and all of a sudden they're not behind you anymore like they were suddenly. Like they swore fealty to you, almost like you're like, oh great, oh cool, they're gonna be on my side the whole time, and then suddenly they're gone and stuff. Like, so sworn fealty is like too far, but like, you know what I mean? I got a pact, a partnership. It's something that you feel like, hey, this is something we can move forward with. All I can say about that is kind of prepare for it. Like Tiny Disaster was saying, you have to be prepared for certain things. And that's something that you might have to prepare for if a relationship goes sour or if the person just ghosts. That sucks, but it's a reality. That's how people work sometimes. So it's just how it goes.
It is.
I'm not sure that there's a way that you can detect that all the time. You know what I mean? Like people will give you they'll say the right things and they'll be in the right situation, right?
It's a bit of a weird one though, because like I said, it's been a few people it's happened to, not many, because I put myself in the situation that much, but it tends to be mentors are willing to help, which is great. So you're getting something out of it, but then they just don't want anything to do with you after that. They're like, yeah, I'll be willing to give you all this advice, but that we're not ever going to work together. I don't really want to do anything with you. It just doesn't go anywhere from there. Which, that kind of sucks. It's almost like, hey, you get to meet one of your heroes, and then they're just like, oh, cool, yeah, no, I'll give you all this help. oh, hey, you've been here for 5 years doing the same thing I'm doing. We're not peers because I don't care about you types. It sucks. It's a
Yeah,
bit
and
rough.
hero meeting can have that effect, right? Like
Yeah.
you're not the person that I thought you were at all, or like I was actually hoping that you'd be like a decent, like enough person and stuff like that. You answered the email, so obviously you took the time to like write the email. So, but yet they still like go out of their way to be like, I want to point out certain things, and it hurts, and it's not cool. Misty calls it power networking. I totally agree. Do not power network. Just casual, like easygoing networking. We're not trying to power network through things, right? We're not trying to like force. We're not trying to do things short term or really quickly and accomplish like things super fast in terms of that's just going to put you in the wrong mindset of the approach. There's nobody out there that's just sitting out there that you don't know yet that you should feel that you can grab by like the shirt collars and be like, you're on my side now and you have to help me. Like that's just not how networking works. So
Yeah. So
that approach is nasty.
I think the way I've changed, and again, I don't network that much to be honest, because outside of building relationships with other developers, publishers, stuff like that, I still do that. But as far as other peers, other people that do the same thing, I don't do it that much because I don't have time to really know who's out there doing other stuff like me that would be willing to work with me, and that's what I want. I want a relationship where I'd be like, hey, you want to go do this thing? Oh yeah, cool. Let's go do this thing, and we can go do something together. I want it to be mutually beneficial, essentially, and not just a
Right.
one-sided thing.
Yeah, and to clarify, like that's just a piece of your networking pie. Like obviously you have crazy good networking with a lot of like publishers and developers. Like your ability to communicate and stay in touch and acquire their products through like the exchange of we're going to cover and show off the games and stuff. That's something that I know that you have. I would imagine hundreds of at this point, like of individuals and companies at this point. And knowing how indies work and how the explosion of games have happened over the last few years, you probably have thousands, like or darn near 1,000. You know what I mean? Like it's like that many games have come out that are now game as a status quo. We talked about this. Games need content creators, like their support. So we're reaching out now, like more than ever to the right ones. Hopefully the right ones. Again, we've talked about developers that are still learning that maybe reach out to the biggest ones or the wrong approaches and stuff like that. But it's just been really an important thing. And I think you're networking in the way that makes the most sense for you to network, right? Like you getting to like watch other people and like that are in the same space is kind of a luxury, is kind of something that you can do like if you had the time to do it. And I know that your schedule is racked like a lot of the times. It's not like you have like hours to go, all right, now I'm going to just sit down and watch what other people are up to and stuff like that. So it's kind of like maybe something to work towards, but it's never that. I understand the difference because I'm not where I want to be in terms of some of my assessments of playing like other indie games, right? Like of just saying I'm going to purchase this, check it out. Everybody's talking about it. That's what I see so many indie devs do. I'm not saying that this is like this makes them like the best of and all that kind of stuff. But I see some successful devs seem to play everything. You know what I mean? Like it's like you get the sense that they're like oh man they've spent time looking at the design and approaches and decisions in these games that everybody's talking about for a week or a day or a month. Obviously games just come and go so fast nowadays. So, it's really interesting to think about that. I know we're kind of just flowing right now, but
so I just want to throw my final point for I guess really our first point is all that, and my final thing is I have no problem helping people that are new to whatever. If it's something that I have any kind of knowledge about, I will tell them this is how I did it. This is I don't claim to know everything, but go at it with a respectful approach. They don't know what they're doing. You didn't know what you're doing when you started, and try to help them. And again, in situations like that, I don't expect anything back. It'd be nice if down the road they're like, oh hey, I've been doing this for a while. Oh, you're still around, cool. And then like we reconnect. I'd be totally fine with that. So that's pretty much networking for me in a nutshell. That's how I would do everything.
And that makes me think to point out that like you should look and connect with people who are putting themselves out there as well, that are outgoing, that are giving you the vibe that they're interested in connecting and interested in discovering new people and working with them. Because that's going to start you on a better platform than just walking into a room of strangers and hoping for the best, right? Like if you can kind of have that approach, wherever you're at, whether it's in the mental or in the virtual space, or in physical form, that approach I think will really help everything. TD, do you have anything else? I think we're heading towards a wrap up at this point. I'm not sure if we have too much more to talk about.
We'd started to kind of jump into the social media side of all of it before, and then kind of got pulled back here because it is.
Well, let's spend some time on it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a different kind of networking. They are social networks. It is kind of networking en masse, that you are putting yourself out there to potentially anyone rather than having one-on-one conversations. But it is a different way to build a network.
Yeah, and it can kind of there are levels to it, right? Like, I mean, obviously, like if you think about DMs, connecting through private messages. I've had a lot of networking opportunities through my Twitter accounts. Like you said, you put things out there, but then certain people maybe want to contact you, don't know how, and don't have obviously you try to post an email, but some people just use social media to reach out and do that kind of thing. I would say it's a mistake if you don't either have your DMs open or have the ability to have someone send you a message and you can approve it, which is to me the same thing as having your DMs open, but it's a little, I guess there's an extra gatekeeping thing there. But it's funny how many like really established, like you're like, man, that is a really famous person that's contacted me, or it's a really established person or whatever. And they seem to prefer social media as their main form of contact. Like email is like not their thing. And so just like we've talked about with other talks, by giving yourself like kind of multifaceted, opportunities to be contacted, you're going to give yourself potentially more opportunity. You're opening at least the valves, right, for more opportunities to come through.
I think different ways of reaching out kind of, and people will have different senses of it, but provide a different level of commitment, like just kind of jumping into DMs with a casual question, starting a conversation, versus having a whole formal email where you're introducing yourself. And emails built for networking tend to be really long-winded, where you get to, these people are busy and people kind of wish you would just lead with what you want.
Yeah.
But that doesn't feel as natural in a networking context. So it's just kind of feeling out what the right approach for what you're looking for is.
That's a good point. When you're writing and not talking, you need to think about like the too long didn't read approach. You need to make sure that people aren't having to go through tomes of what you're saying. A lot of times Twitter helps me in that right, because I don't necessarily write how I talk. I can write a lot, but with Twitter, and I'm trying to get a message across, I'm like, how do I get what I need to get across in a really limited capacity? And it helps. It teaches me it teaches me brevity, right? Like it teaches me how to like cut things out. It does annoy me when I'm like, there's nothing else to cut out. There's nothing else to cut out. But it happens. But then you find other solutions, right? Break it up. Say, okay, well, this part I could talk about later. TD points out you shouldn't just jump into a full thing all the time on social media, but rather just lead in with something just light and conversation sparking.
Too though, so it's so hard to give advice. It's kind of just feeling out the middle, because you also see people who will just start with like, hey, and then maybe eventually another message, how are you? Like, they're looking for some sort of networky thing, or just being creepy on the internet. But they're trying to be polite and not just jump into the conversation where you're like, this part is
no. This is coming back to the original point of like the networking. When you walk into a room, it's okay and actually like kind of expected to state who you are and what you're doing there. Like that's really helpful to take away the sort of awkwardness or ambiguousness of the situation.
Well, I think you could lead with something simple as, hey, if you have time, I have a question I'd like to ask. Something like that. And then at least they know that you're not a creepy person on the internet.
Just saying, hey, like, I guess the point is just don't just leave it as hey, or if you're going to walk into a conversation or walk into an active conversation in like a public event, have an understanding of what you're going to do as they look towards you and say, oh, who are you and why are, as you've walked into the situation, like, give us a little bit about yourself. Like,
hi, I'm nobody. Please don't look at me, but I have a question. No,
I walked in and I wasn't ready yet, that kind of thing. If you lead with that, I guess that's kind of funny if you're good with comedy. But other than that, yeah, you really want to make sure that when you step in to a conversation, again, you know what your intentions are, because I think that's really important. Because if they don't get your intentions, then it gets awkward.
Missy says she's not sure if this would fall under networking, but a few months back she had a question about the games that she enjoyed recently, and now she feels like she has an amazing friendship. So to me, that's exactly what networking should be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that's really cool too, because networking. We talk about like how we've talked about a lot about like seeking out networking opportunities, right? And here's the event, like these approaches to like when you're actively networking, so to speak. But networking doesn't have to be active. Networking, at its core, should be this like passive thing that's just kind of happening, and hopefully you have networking in a way like passively in your life that's just feels natural, right? So you're
how to be a verb versus like a state of being.
right, and it's and as Missy points out, something that her natural interests pulled her towards this relationship, right? That is now sort of that's occurred. It's not that she was actively seeking out people to connect with and network with. It was just that she had a question or she had an interest in something, and it led her further down, and then she connected, and it went from there.
Well, Tiny Disaster, you mentioned you pretty much network more. You do more networking to the whole world or broader networking when you're reaching out on social media. Is there anything then you went into talking a little bit more about more specific going into DMs and messaging and stuff like that. Is there any do's and don'ts toward just broad messaging, like just through tweets that aren't directed at anyone in particular, or thoughts on that?
Getting value of if you're looking to put yourself out there in a sort of a professional way, and like value doesn't have to be you're teaching skills. It can be comedy or entertainment or just insight, or here's a kind of a problem that I'm working through, but something that makes people want to continue to see what it is you're doing. Because that broader networking ideally eventually leads to those smaller connections, just like you would like with an in-person event or a more sustained connection over time. But you're trying to stand out in a crowd and bring something to the table versus just, I'm here. People should just assume that I'm interesting.
I'll also, I'm not sure this is just my perspective or not, but with Twitch, with Twitter, these are platforms that have been around a long time. So people following is not like something that's in vogue right now. Like it's not like people are like following everybody like they were when those platforms first got started, right? Like that was something that people just naturally did. So I wouldn't worry heavily about like, oh, I need to get my numbers up, or I need to have this many followers or that many followers and stuff like that. What you need is a like established core network of people, like a group of more than a couple, like hopefully a dozen or dozens, maybe even maybe hundreds, but not like you don't need to like push to the thousands. And just like the same, if those people follow you and you communicate with them and you have that network, it doesn't matter if you have 100 followers or 1,000 followers. It's a helpful tool to have. It's a helpful thing to have, resource to have, and I think it's been really important for me to on Twitch, which like I haven't built like just a huge following on, but the connections I've made and the people that I am connected with are really like that is the most important part to me, and the growth part of it just doesn't matter. And I understand that in certain cases it might be the livelihood of your job to grow a platform. And that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm just talking about like as you network, if your networking group is a little tighter than others, that you're like, oh, I look up to this person, they have thousands of people that they communicate with, their followers, etc. Like, don't sweat it. Like we're not all like gonna just be social media rock stars and just get like thousands of followers that build up, especially in 2022 as these platforms are kind of aging and don't have the same kind of like spark that I get used to have, where everybody would just like follow everybody in different senses that they just don't anymore. So it's something to keep in mind. Like it's okay to step into these arenas fresh and like this is my first time doing this, etc. in 2022, but just know where they're at in their life cycles and understand what you can get from them and what might not be as reasonable unless you are willing to just kind of go for it in senses that I don't think a lot of us are willing to in a lot of cases. You know what I mean? Like the full on commitment to a building a social media platform is usually a little bit more than or a lot more than a lot of us are willing to commit to or want to do.
Overall, looking at it, like how you're putting yourself out there, how you're creating content, in terms of finding the right people instead of just finding the most people, that it's going to be a stronger network if it's people who have followed you because there's something specific about you, not just because they happen to find your content. And
Right. Right. Yeah. And yeah, I totally agree. I thought
Yeah.
I had more, but honestly, I feel like we've exhausted some of the areas, not in a bad way, just hitting them good. Okay, so the one thing I wrote down that I do want to point out that I liked because I thought it was a good line. You're looking to have natural interactions that you should be all right with, if 9 out of 10 are simply socializing in the end.
Yeah.
With the approach of like how to go into it, right, and the expectations setting, all that.
I also want to clarify that when I do say that my idea of networking is more along the lines of building relationships, that doesn't mean like we're going to be friends all the there's business relationship, there's personal relationships, there's just friends in general hanging out, like there's a whole bunch of different things. So it doesn't
It's a
necessarily
case by
mean
case
it's going to
basis
be
most of the time. You're going to feel this out, right? Yeah. You're
and
somebody.
finding ways to see if your expectations line up with another person. Of what are we both hoping to gain from this interaction or this relationship?
If it's not naturally there already, I totally agree with that,
Yeah.
TD. Like if it's not like naturally just sort of spilled out, like kind of like obvious to both sides, I think that's really important. But it also is funny, Bumpy, as you mentioned, you'll be in talk with somebody who's like just had, it's very business, has nothing to do with the thing, and then you'll find that you have similar hobbies or you have a similar interests and stuff, and it can take that relationship into a different kind of realm and direction. That's kind of cool.
One of the things that's a bit weird though, and again, this is something doing online stuff more specifically, is there's so many just terrible people out there. So it does make it more difficult when you have like a genuine interest. You're like, hey, say like for instance, we have a group that we do streaming with on Fridays and stuff. I would love to get more people into that, but it's weird, and I would love to not just be a bunch of 30 something men doing it, white men doing it, and it'd be nice to find some female streamers that would like to join that and so on and so forth. But like, how do you approach that without being creepy? Because like there's nothing there's nothing that we were gonna be creepy about. It's just there's so many horrible people that they have to deal with. So it can be difficult networking, and that cross-gender networking is especially difficult, especially in a one-on-one situation, like on Twitter, for instance, or something along those lines. It's like you want to put it out there, like, hey, if somebody wants to go do something, let us, like do the streaming. Let us know. It's instead of going, hey, I watched your stream. Want to stream with me? It seems weird, right?
There's a lot of collateral
So
damage because like women have to go into it being like, hope this guy doesn't like
it's
go
awful.
crazy on me. So I mean, there's just a lot of collateral damage with it, which sucks. And like you said, it's something that is just has to be endured essentially.
And yeah, women
Has
need to protect themselves too. So many people are gonna maybe be exactly with that mindset. That's what they think. Oh, this
if you
person's
want to
and
see,
then they're terrible
yeah,
people. So
if you want to see a silver lining on it, I feel like right now the relationships that do start up are much more meaningful than they used to be, because there are so many checks and balances now that there weren't that we didn't used to have in place, or at least we as a society weren't standing up for and saying that yes, we need to be having these checks and balances before we move forward with the friendliness, behaviors, with things of the oh, we're friends, that kind of thing. I think there's just more of a process now with that, and I think that's okay. It's just kind of we're all going through it. We talked about before is like we as a generation, or the generations that are like alive right now, are going through like some pretty intense changes, and like some societal like things that were like, oh wow, we're gonna make some adjustments on this, and we as individuals all have to kind of deal with that because that we were doing something else before, and now we're asking ourselves to do something. Some of us, at least a good portion of society, to change certain outlooks and stuff like that. So anyway, not trying to get philosophical here.
Bumpy mentioned, because I do think there's so many opportunities that aren't going to be overthought about. If it's someone whose stream you enjoy, show up in their stream and comment and be a name that they recognize as behaving well in their chat and actually being a fan instead of like show up for their content before you're asking them,
Oh yeah.
oh, do you want
Yes.
to take part in
Yeah,
mine?
And that goes back to one of my own problems. I don't have the time to do that. And then it's like I'm trying. I'm like, but no. This is just like it's one of those things where this is kind of a networking barricade or barrier, so to speak, because I said some people are just terrible out there. So I would hope that women and the marginalized people are protecting themselves and are not just getting like scammed, but that does make that like there is a barrier for entry to like get closer to them, so you can build a relationship, build a a networking relationship with them and actually do something. So that's something that
It's
like I've run into lately, and it's like I wish it was different, but like I totally understand, and I want them to be
and
safe above all else.
right, and like for the first time, a lot of these people that you mentioned are having space to breathe and
Yeah.
have their own platforms and stuff. So it's almost like it's okay to step back and let them have that. But it's like I do feel the sadness of lack of collaborations at time, right? Like of like we could collaborate more, but also there's a lot of again I don't want to get too deep into the philosophy, but there's like a lot of like diversity and stuff, but it's still the white guy, his face, or he's the manager, or he's the owner, that kind of stuff. And so it's just like I definitely tread lightly or lighter than I used to with that kind of stuff in terms of like, oh yeah, let's collaborate and that kind of thing. I almost like look for a way to be supportive, but like not like like try to avoid calling any attention to me whatsoever. So it's just a weird time, right? Like I think we're all struggling with this to some extent, like and how best to be individuals, promote ourselves, but also like support those around us that we are understanding are going through like super challenges that now they're finally getting some opportunities, and there's still challenges ahead as they get these opportunities. So it's just a lot. Like it totally is, and we're totally not talking about networking anymore. No. But that's okay.
It still kind of is, and it's one of those things where
it's socializing. It's culture, so it's really important.
I want all ships to rise. It's not like, hey, come be our female whatever. It's hey, come join the group, and then when you're doing stuff, we can promote you. If you need extra people, we can help. I want it to be.
I think tiny disaster like that, to some extent will forgive our lament, because I think we have an understanding and awareness of why it's okay to have that lament as long as we have certain understandings of how else like why that's the case and that kind of stuff. So I think the awareness is important first and foremost. So yeah, I mean, I didn't know we were going to get this deep on the networking talk, but it is good because it is true. Like these conversations kind of need to having these conversations will equip you in networking situations, right? Because like this is the socializing that you'll find yourself in a lot of times. As you assess them, if they're a good person, if you think, oh, I want to hang out with them going forward, or I don't think that they're like a bad person or a jerk or have a terrible, horrible viewpoint, they're doing the same with you. So it's what I mean, like that's happening in both ways. So
I think some people would disagree, but my stance would be I'd rather be offered the opportunity than not, because people are afraid of reaching out. You just have to be prepared that people are going to say no or ignore your
post. That's not the problem. That's not the problem whether they would say no or not in the situation. It's just like you reach out a bunch of people. What's this creep guy doing? I don't. I never want to put out those
how
vibes,
they see it. Yeah. That's not on you.
Yeah, I agree. Especially if your approach is professional, then that's a them problem. And we always know that if it's a them problem, that's not something that you can control.
That's fair. Anyway, sorry to bring a little bit of personal, but it was pertinent to what we were talking about.
Networking is personal. It's personal to all of us, and we all have connections to that. It's not like somebody's like, oh, you have to be a game developer to network. That's nonsense. Every person does this. So.
Well, I actually have no idea what we're talking about next week. Does anybody else remember? I apologize.
I'm scrolling.
Exactly, game dev deep dives.
Is it game dev?
Lessons
not
learned
deep dives.
From the game
dev
trenches.
Trenches. That's what I was going
to. Okay. That sounds intense. So we're going to talk so we're talking about like
the war-torn
when it gets rough, when it gets intense, and we've learned some things from these intense
personal experiences or going into just some challenges that we've all had within the industry. I think what Bumpy was just talking about could definitely be kind of
Well, and I think both of you have just within your Indie Bros time have racked up some of these trenches discussions and stuff. What it's like to work with clients and partners that have expectations sometimes weightier than others. I know TD has worked with one company that we won't name names or anything like that. Just like going over experiences and different approaches, and talk about maybe some of the different expectations that we've had with or developers have had for us in terms of like delivery updates, reports, all that kind of stuff. Some can be pretty intense, more intense than we even we can anticipate sometimes, but we roll with punches. So I know Tiny Disaster has at least one story about that. So
all right, well, if you guys want to find out about that,
I put her on the spot now. So it's like oh
tune
gosh,
in
now
next week and watch a Tiny Disaster crack and crumble under the pressure.
He's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So
that cup is now put her under. So yeah, that'll be what we're doing next week. So make sure you guys tune in. Be right here, starting off at 3 p.m. Eastern on the Indie Bros PR Twitch and YouTube channels. Until then, I've been your host, Bumpy McSquigums. I'm joined by, Cupogoodness and a Tiny Disaster way over in that direction-ish over there. It's really, really difficult to point. It's fine. And we'll see you guys next week. Bye.